I want you to think about a ship for a moment. A large ship, somewhere in the middle of a vast ocean, with a destination programmed into its navigation system. Now imagine that the navigator makes a single small adjustment to the heading. Not a dramatic turn, not an emergency correction, but a quiet, almost imperceptible shift of just 2 degrees to the left. From the deck, you would not notice it. The water looks identical. The sky looks the same. The ship feels the same beneath your feet. But given enough time and enough distance, that 2-degree shift will take the ship to an entirely different continent. A destination hundreds of miles from the original. Not because of a catastrophic event. Not because of a dramatic decision or a moment of crisis. Simply because of a small, consistent change in direction, applied early enough and held long enough to make all the difference. That is what we are talking about today. Not a revolution. Not an overnight transformation. Not the kind of dramatic reinvention that looks impressive on social media and rarely survives contact with real life. We are talking about something far more powerful and far more achievable than any of that. We are talking about changing the direction of your life, 2 degrees at a time, through a set of rules so fundamental, so deeply rooted in how human lives actually work, that applying even one of them consistently would produce results you can feel within weeks and see clearly within a year. 7 rules. That is all. Not 100 habits, not a 5-year plan, not a complex system requiring a new version of yourself before you can begin. 7 rules that, if you genuinely take them into your life starting today, will change where you arrive. Not dramatically at first, but undeniably, over time, in a way that will cause the people who know you to look at you differently and wonder quietly what changed. I'm going to give you those rules today. All 7 of them. With the full honesty and depth they deserve. And I want you to stay with me, because the most important one is not the first one. And the one that will change your life most profoundly is likely not the one you expect. Let me start by being honest about something that most people in this space are not willing to say clearly. If you are somewhere between 40 and 65 years old, and you feel, even quietly, even partially, that your life is not quite moving in the direction you intended, you are in far better company than the world would have you believe. The narrative we are fed is that by a certain age, people have their lives sorted. They are either successful or they are not, and if they are not, the window for real change has largely closed. That narrative is not just wrong, it is actively harmful. And I want to dismantle it carefully and completely before we go any further. The truth, which you can verify through your own honest observation, is this. Most people arrive at midlife with a deep and complicated mixture of genuine achievement and quietly unacknowledged drift. They have built things they are legitimately proud of. They have survived things that required more strength than they gave themselves credit for. They have shown up, year after year, for the people and the responsibilities that depended on them. All of that is real, and all of it matters. And at the same time, and this is the part that takes honesty to admit, many of them look at the direction their life is currently moving and recognize, in the honest quiet of an early morning or a late night, that if that direction continues unchanged for another 10 years, they will arrive somewhere they did not choose. Not because they failed dramatically, but because they drifted. Because the current of daily life, the obligations, the routines, the comfortable defaults, carried them along without much conscious steering, and the destination revealed itself gradually rather than all at once. Drift is the great silent thief of human potential. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like failure while it is happening. It feels like life being busy, like timing not quite being right, like waiting for a better moment that somehow never fully arrives. And by the time you recognize it clearly enough to name it, years have passed. But here is what drift cannot survive: deliberate, principled, consistent redirection. Here is what drift cannot outlast: a person who understands the rules that govern human change and applies them with the seriousness they deserve. And here is what I want you to understand with complete clarity before we continue. The fact that you have drifted does not mean you are lost. It means you need a compass. And that is exactly what we are building today. But here's something most people realize too late about the rules we're about to discuss. They are not new information. You have encountered versions of most of them before. What you have not done, what almost no one does, is apply them simultaneously, seriously, and without the quiet internal asterisk that says, except in my particular case, for my particular reasons. Today we remove the asterisk. Jim Rohn had a way of cutting through complexity and arriving at a truth so simple that it felt almost uncomfortable in its clarity. He said, "If you don't design your own life plan, chances are you'll fall into someone else's plan. And guess what they have planned for you? Not much." That observation is not a criticism of the people around you. Most of the people in your life love you and want good things for you. But their plans, their needs, their expectations, their demands on your time and energy are designed to serve their priorities, not yours. And if you are not operating from a clearly articulated set of rules and principles that govern how you spend your time, your attention, and your choices, you will naturally and inevitably spend most of your life serving other people's plans. Not because you chose to. Because you did not choose anything else with sufficient clarity and conviction. The word rules might create some resistance in you. We live in a culture that is deeply suspicious of rules, that celebrates spontaneity and flexibility and going with the flow as virtues. And I understand the appeal of that. Rules can feel restrictive. They can feel like the opposite of freedom. But here is the philosophical reframe I want to offer you. The right rules are not restrictions on your freedom. They are the architecture of your freedom. They are the structure that makes freedom possible. Because without structure, without a set of clear, personal, deeply held principles that govern your daily choices, you are not free. You are simply reactive. You are a pinball, bouncing from urgency to urgency, from other people's demands to your own impulses, without a governing philosophy that says, "This is what I stand for, this is what I will and will not do, this is the direction I have chosen and I am holding to it." The 7 rules I am about to share with you are not constraints. They are a compass. And the difference between a life lived with a compass and a life lived without one is, over time, the difference between arriving somewhere you chose and arriving somewhere you merely ended up. One more thing before we begin. These rules do not require a perfect starting point. They do not require that your circumstances improve before you can apply them. They do not require a dramatic life overhaul or a period of preparation or a moment when everything aligns favorably. They require only what you have available right now, a decision to take your own direction seriously, starting in this conversation and carried forward one choice at a time. That is all. And as we are about to see, that is everything. I want to share a story with you that I have thought about many times over the years, because it captures something essential about what we are exploring today. There were 2 brothers. I will call them Marcus and Paul. They grew up in the same house, attended the same schools, were raised by the same parents with the same values and the same expectations. To anyone observing them in their early 20s, they seemed equally positioned. Similar intelligence, similar work ethic, similar charm, similar starting point, in every measurable way. By the time they were in their early 50s, their lives looked almost nothing alike. Marcus had built a business, a stable and genuinely joyful marriage of nearly 3 decades, and a reputation in his community for integrity and quiet generosity. He was not wealthy by the standard of extreme wealth, but he was financially secure and, this was the part that struck everyone who knew him, genuinely contented. Not resigned. Not making peace with disappointment. Actually, deeply, unaffectedly content with the life he was living. Paul was not unhappy, exactly. He had a career that paid adequately, a marriage that worked in the functional sense, children he loved. But there was something in him, visible to anyone paying attention, that had the quality of unfinished business. A restlessness. A sense, barely suppressed in most conversations, that he had somewhere not quite arrived, that the life he was living was adjacent to the life he had intended, close enough to be frustrating but far enough to be quietly painful. The difference between them was not talent. It was not fortune or circumstance. When you look carefully at the decades between their 20s and their 50s, the difference was a set of rules. Principles that Marcus lived by, not perfectly, not without failure and revision, but consistently enough and seriously enough that they compounded into a life of genuine direction. And the absence of those principles in Paul's daily choices, not because he was lazy or unintelligent, but because he had never quite formalized them, never quite made them non-negotiable, that absence had compounded in a different direction. And here is what makes this story genuinely important. Paul recognized this. In his early 50s, he sat down with Marcus and had a conversation that lasted most of a day, the kind of honest conversation that brothers sometimes finally have when enough time has passed and the stakes feel real enough. And Marcus told him something that Paul said later was the most valuable thing anyone had ever said to him. He said, "The direction of a life is not set by the big dramatic moments. It is set by the small daily rules you live by when no one is watching and nothing is urgent. Change the rules, and the direction changes. Change the direction early enough, and you arrive somewhere completely different." Paul spent the following decade applying exactly that. And the life he built in those 10 years, the financial security, the deepened relationships, the sense of purpose and forward momentum, surprised even him with its force and speed. He was 53 when he started. And he would tell you, without hesitation, that those were the best 10 years of his adult life. The rules are the direction. The direction is the destination. And the destination is available to you, starting now. Let's get into them. Rule 1. Take full ownership of where you are. The first rule is the hardest one. Not because it is complicated. It is in fact the simplest of the 7. It is the hardest because it requires something that every layer of modern culture actively discourages. It requires you to accept complete, unconditional, non-negotiable personal responsibility for the direction your life is currently moving in. Not partial responsibility. Not responsibility with caveats. Not, "I take responsibility for my choices, but the circumstances were difficult." Full, clean, honest ownership. Now I want to be careful here, because this principle is sometimes weaponized in ways that are dishonest and harmful. Taking full ownership of your life does not mean that external circumstances are irrelevant. They are not. It does not mean that the difficulties you faced were not real. They were. It does not mean that luck, timing, and the actions of other people have played no role in where you are. They have. What it means is this: regardless of all those factors, you are the single most powerful variable in the equation of your own life. And as long as you are investing your energy in explaining your current position by reference to the factors outside of your control, you are simultaneously, and entirely unavoidably, relinquishing your power to change it. The moment you shift from explanation to ownership, the moment you genuinely say, without qualification, "I am where I am and I am responsible for changing it," something fundamental shifts in your psychology. Your brain stops looking for reasons why change is difficult and starts looking for pathways forward. Your energy stops leaking into blame and justification and starts accumulating behind intention and action. This shift cannot be faked. You cannot say the words while holding the internal asterisk that says, "except for the ways it really was someone else's fault." The shift has to be real. And it is, I will be honest, one of the most uncomfortable things a human being can genuinely do. Because ownership without excuse is vulnerable. It exposes you to the full weight of your choices without the protection of narrative. But it is also, without question, the most liberating thing available to any person at any age. Because if you are truly responsible, if the direction of your life is genuinely in your hands, then you have what you need to change it. Right now. With what you have. Where you are. That is not a burden. That is the greatest freedom available to a human being. Rule 2. Define what you actually want, on your own terms. The second rule follows directly from the first. If you are taking ownership of the direction of your life, the immediate and unavoidable question becomes, in which direction? Toward what? Defined how? By whose standard? And this is where a surprising number of people, even highly intelligent and self-aware people, discover something uncomfortable. They have been pursuing goals they did not choose. Goals that were chosen for them, by their family's expectations, by their culture's definition of success, by the comparison economy of social media, by the admiration of people whose admiration they wanted even if those people did not share their values. They have been spending the one life they have in pursuit of a destination that, if they are fully honest, does not actually call to them personally. Jim Rohn was direct about this. Happiness is not something you find, it's something you create. And you cannot create it by building someone else's version of a good life. You can only create it by knowing, with clarity and honesty and courage, what a good life actually means to you, and then pursuing that, without apology and without constant referral to external validation. This requires two things that many people at midlife have never fully done. The first is an honest audit of your current desires, not what you used to want, not what you think you should want, not what would impress the people around you, but what you actually, genuinely, quietly want for your daily experience, your relationships, your work, your level of financial freedom, your physical health, your sense of purpose and meaning. The second thing it requires is the courage to pursue that, even when it does not match the expectations of the people around you. Even when it requires disappointing someone. Even when it looks different from the conventional script for a person of your age and background. Because here is the deepest truth about this rule. At the end of your life, the only regrets that genuinely haunt people are not the things they tried and failed. They are the things they wanted and never pursued, the life they glimpsed and turned away from because it seemed too risky, too unconventional, too late. Do not add to that list. Define what you want, on your own terms, and begin moving toward it with the full seriousness it deserves. Rule 3. Protect your time like your life depends on it, because it does. The third rule is one that every successful person I have ever studied or encountered lives by, whether they articulate it this way or not. It is this: time is the only truly non-renewable resource available to you, and how you spend your time is, without exception, how you spend your life. That statement is so direct it might seem obvious. But watch how few people actually live by it. Watch how casually and consistently most people surrender the hours of their days to activities, obligations, and interactions that contribute nothing meaningful to the direction they say they want their lives to move in. Watch how much time is consumed by low-value urgency, the endless minor fires that feel important in the moment and are forgotten within a week. Watch how much time is lost to passive consumption, to distraction, to the comfortable numbness of screens and scrolling and the manufactured stimulation of an attention economy specifically engineered to capture and hold your hours. Now calculate, roughly and honestly, how many hours a week you currently invest in activities directly connected to the most important goals and relationships in your life. Not hours spent nearby those goals. Hours genuinely invested in them, with focus and intention. For most people, that number is significantly smaller than they would like to admit. And the gap between that number and the total hours available in their week is where their future is quietly being spent on someone else's priorities. Protecting your time begins with a single, non-negotiable practice: scheduling your priorities before you schedule anything else. Not finding time for what matters. Making time for what matters, in advance, with the same seriousness and commitment that you give to your most important professional obligations. If a goal is worth having, it is worth an appointment in your calendar. If a relationship is important, it is worth protected, intentional, undivided time, not the leftover hours after everything else has been attended to. And this is where the rule becomes demanding in a way that tests people at a deep level. Protecting your time requires learning to say no. To good things, sometimes. To things that are genuinely pleasant and not entirely without value. Because the enemy of your most important priorities is rarely bad things. It is good things that are not your best things. The invitation that is enjoyable but not aligned. The obligation that is reasonable but not necessary. The conversation that is interesting but not productive. Every yes is a no to something else. Every hour spent on what is not important is an hour not spent on what is. At your stage of life, with the clarity of experience you now have about how quickly time passes, this is not a philosophical abstraction. It is the practical reality of how your future is being built or squandered, 1 hour at a time. Spend your hours like the irreplaceable, finite, utterly non-refundable resource that they are. Because that is exactly what they are. Rule 4. Invest seriously in who you are becoming. The fourth rule is one that Jim Rohn spoke about more than almost any other, and it is one that I believe becomes more important, not less, as you move through midlife and beyond. The rule is this: the most important investment available to you is not in your portfolio or your property or even your business. It is in yourself, in who you are becoming. Rohn said it with characteristic precision: work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Most people invert this completely. They work extremely hard on producing external results, the income, the promotions, the achievements, while investing very little in the internal development that would make those external efforts both more effective and more meaningful. What does investing in yourself actually mean in practical terms? It means reading seriously, not casually, not occasionally, but as a consistent daily discipline. Not because reading is inherently virtuous, but because the accumulated wisdom of humanity is stored in books, and the person who reads an hour a day for a decade becomes, in the most literal sense, a different and more capable thinker than the person who does not. It means seeking out perspectives that challenge your current thinking rather than merely confirming it. It means learning from the experience of people who have already been where you are trying to go. It also means investing in your health with the seriousness that the stakes actually warrant. Not as a vanity project, but as a foundation. Because your physical energy, your capacity to show up with vitality, focus, and presence for the work and the relationships that matter most to you, is directly and powerfully influenced by how you treat your body. Sleep, movement, nutrition. These are not optional lifestyle preferences. They are the infrastructure of everything else. And every year you invest in them produces returns that compound. And every year you neglect them produces costs that also compound. But the deepest form of investing in yourself is something less tangible and more important than any of the above. It is the continuous, honest, sometimes uncomfortable examination of your own beliefs, your own assumptions, your own patterns of thought and behavior, and the willingness to revise them when the evidence of your life suggests that they are not serving you. The person you are becoming is the most consequential project available to you. Treat it accordingly. Rule 5. Build relationships that pull you forward. The fifth rule is one that operates so quietly and so continuously that most people dramatically underestimate its power. It is this: the relationships you invest in most deeply will either accelerate your growth and your direction, or they will slow them, and over time the difference between those two outcomes is the difference between very different lives. This is not a call to coldness or calculation in your personal relationships. The people you love are not assets to be evaluated on their utility. But there is a distinction worth making with real honesty. There are relationships that energize you, that challenge you to be better, that hold a standard you want to rise to meet, that offer you honesty when comfort would be easier to give. And there are relationships that, however comfortable and familiar, consistently drain your energy, lower your standards, reinforce your limitations, or keep you anchored to a version of yourself that you are trying to grow beyond. Most people, if they are genuinely honest, know which of their relationships fall into which category. They know whose voice in their head raises their game and whose voice confirms their excuses. They know which conversations leave them feeling energized and forward-looking, and which ones leave them feeling small and slightly stagnant. And most of them do almost nothing with that knowledge. Here is the rule applied: be intentional about who you spend your best hours with. Seek out the people who are doing, thinking, and becoming what you aspire to. Not to copy them or to use them, but because proximity to genuine excellence, genuine discipline, genuine ambition, genuine character, raises your own standards in ways that no amount of solitary motivation can replicate. You become, over time, the standard of the group you belong to. So choose your group with the deliberateness that the stakes deserve. And invest in your most important relationships with the same quality of intentional effort that you invest in your most important work. The people who matter most to you are not assets that sustain themselves without attention. They are living, complex, changing human beings who need your genuine presence, your curiosity, your honesty, and your continued investment. The relationships that end up mattering most at the end of a life are almost always the ones that were tended to with consistent care throughout the middle of it. Rule 6. Embrace discomfort as the price of every meaningful thing. The sixth rule is the one that determines, more than any other, the ceiling of what you will allow yourself to achieve. It is this: every meaningful thing in your life, every skill, every achievement, every deepened relationship, every significant growth in character or capability, exists on the other side of discomfort. And your willingness to move toward discomfort rather than away from it is the single most reliable predictor of the quality of your future. We are wired, at the biological level, to avoid discomfort. The nervous system treats psychological discomfort, the anxiety of a difficult conversation, the vulnerability of trying something new, the uncertainty of genuine risk, with much the same urgency as physical threat. It produces the same impulse to retreat, to avoid, to find safety. And in the modern world, where the opportunities for comfort and distraction are essentially unlimited, most people follow that impulse almost every time. Not because they are cowards. Because the system is working exactly as designed. But here is the truth that changes everything once you genuinely absorb it. The discomfort you feel at the edge of your comfort zone is not a warning signal. It is a growth signal. It is your system's way of registering that you are moving into territory where development is possible, where you do not yet have the skills or the confidence or the experience to operate automatically, and where, precisely because you do not, you will develop them if you stay engaged rather than retreat. Every time you have a difficult conversation you have been avoiding, you become slightly more capable of difficult conversations. Every time you pursue the goal that scares you rather than the safer option, you become slightly more capable of navigating fear. Every time you choose the hard thing when the easy thing is available, you deposit something into the reserves of your own self-belief that nothing else can provide. The rule is not to seek discomfort for its own sake. It is to stop using discomfort as a reason not to move, to recognize it as a signal of meaning rather than a signal of danger, and to build, slowly and deliberately, a tolerance for the discomfort that growth always requires, not because you love it, but because you love the person you are becoming more than you love the comfort of staying exactly as you are. Rule 7. Play the long game with absolute consistency. The seventh rule is the one that ties all the others together. And it is, in some ways, the most demanding of the seven, not because it requires the most dramatic action, but because it requires the most sustained commitment. The rule is this: the direction of your life is not determined by what you do on your best days. It is determined by what you do on your ordinary days, and your difficult days, and the days when you cannot feel the motivation and the goal seems distant and the effort seems disproportionate to the visible progress. Most people can access their best behavior occasionally. They can be disciplined for a week, generous for a day, focused for a few exceptional hours. What separates the people who consistently achieve from the people who consistently fall short is not the quality of their best moments. It is the quality of their average moments. Their floor, not their ceiling. Playing the long game means accepting, with real equanimity rather than mere tolerance, that most of the process of building a meaningful life is invisible. It happens in the repetition of small daily choices that produce no visible result today or tomorrow or this week. It happens in the quiet, unglamorous middle section of every meaningful pursuit, the part that comes after the initial excitement has faded and before the results become clear enough to be motivating. That middle section is where most people abandon their direction. And it is where the long-game players are quietly doing the most important work of their lives. Consistency does not require perfection. Let me be clear about that, because perfectionism is one of the most common enemies of consistency. You will miss days. You will have periods where life's demands override your best intentions. You will sometimes fail to live by these rules, and you will need to return to them. None of that disqualifies you or restarts the clock to zero. What matters is the pattern, that over weeks and months and years, the overall direction of your choices is aligned with the direction you have chosen. Think of it this way. A ship that maintains its heading 90% of the time, even with some deviation and some course correction, will still arrive at its destination. A ship that abandons its heading every time the sailing gets difficult will drift indefinitely, no matter how good its navigation system. Consistency is the heading. And holding the heading, over the long arc of time, is how you change not just where you are going, but who you become on the journey. I want to stop before we close and invite you into a genuine moment of reflection. Not a rhetorical exercise, an actual pause, the kind that has the potential to be one of the more important few minutes you spend this week. You have just heard 7 rules. 7 principles that, taken seriously, have the genuine capacity to change the direction of your life. And I suspect that as you listened, at least one of them, possibly 2 or 3, landed with a particular quality. Not just as interesting information, but as a mirror. As a principle that, when you held it up to the pattern of your recent years, reflected something back that was honest and slightly uncomfortable. I want you to identify that rule. The one that stings just slightly. The one you found yourself mentally qualifying with, yes, but in my case. Because the principle you resist most is almost always the one you need most. The one your psychology is most urgently protecting you from applying, because applying it would require a change that your comfort-seeking self would prefer to avoid. Now I want to ask you something even more specific. Of all the rules we explored today, ownership, defining what you want, protecting your time, investing in yourself, choosing your relationships with intention, embracing discomfort, playing the long game, which one, if you applied it with genuine seriousness starting this week, would produce the most meaningful change in your life within 6 months? Not the one that sounds most interesting. Not the one you already do reasonably well. The one where the gap between where you are and where you could be is largest. The one that, if you are honest, you have been meaning to take more seriously for longer than you would care to admit. That is your starting point. Not all 7 at once, though all 7 matter. One rule, genuinely applied, is worth more than 7 rules intellectually appreciated. And one real change, compounded over 6 months, will show you more about what is possible for the rest of your life than any amount of inspiration could. When was the last time you made a decision about your life's direction that was genuinely yours? Not reactive, not pressured, not borrowed from someone else's expectations, but yours, made with full awareness and full commitment. If you cannot answer that question quickly, the answer itself is telling you something important. Listen to it. I want to address something directly now, because it has been sitting beneath this entire conversation and it deserves to be spoken clearly. Some of you are in your 40s and the drift we have been talking about is still relatively recent, a matter of a few years, not decades. The distance between where you are and where you want to be is real but not yet enormous. And for you, the urgency of these rules is about direction setting before the drift compounds further. The investment made now, at this stage, will produce returns across a very long arc of time. Start now. The compounding is entirely in your favor. Others of you are in your 50s or 60s, and the drift I described in that opening section resonates not as a recent thing but as the accumulated story of most of your adult life. The distance feels larger. The time horizon feels shorter. And there is a voice, I suspect some of you know this voice well, that says the window is closing, that the best you can do now is manage the life you have rather than build the one you wanted. I want to speak to that voice directly and honestly. Not to dismiss it, it has a kind of surface logic that deserves respect. But to examine it. Because there is a significant difference between wisdom and resignation, and that voice often presents one as the other. Consider what is actually true about your remaining time. If you are 55 and in reasonable health, you likely have 25 to 35 years ahead of you. Not decades of decline, years of potential productivity, deepened relationships, continued learning, meaningful contribution, and genuine joy. The question is not whether you have time. You have time. The question is whether you will apply these 7 rules to it, or whether you will continue in the direction the drift has been carrying you. Consider what is true about your accumulated assets as a person at this stage. You have knowledge that took decades to earn. You have perspective that younger people are genuinely not yet able to access. You have relationships of depth and duration that are among the most valuable things a human being can possess. You have made enough mistakes to know what to avoid, and enough successes to know what you are genuinely capable of. These are not consolation prizes. They are real and compounding advantages for anyone willing to apply them with direction and intention. And consider this. The man in our story, Paul, the brother who spent his 50s applying these rules, did not spend those years wishing he had started earlier, though he acknowledged that starting earlier would have produced more. He spent them building forward with everything he had, fully present to the possibilities of the decade he was actually in rather than mourning the decades he had passed through with less intention. And the life he built in those 10 years became the best decade of his life. That option is available to you, exactly as it was available to him. The rules do not care how old you are when you begin to live by them. They produce the same results for anyone who applies them with the same seriousness, at any age, from any starting point. The only starting point that does not work is the one you never arrive at. I want to be fully honest with you in these final few minutes, in the way that a conversation like this one demands. You are going to leave this conversation and return to your life. And your life is going to present you, within hours, with a choice. Not a dramatic, obvious choice. Those are rare. A quiet one. A small one. The kind that does not feel significant in the moment, but that is, in the light of everything we have discussed today, exactly the kind of choice that determines the direction of a life. It might be the choice between doing the thing you have been putting off for weeks and spending another evening in comfortable distraction. It might be the choice between having the honest conversation you have been avoiding and continuing the silence that is slowly costing you a relationship. It might be the choice between opening the book or the financial spreadsheet or the business plan that represents the direction you say you want to move in, and instead opening the phone for the 75th time today. These choices are small. They feel inconsequential in isolation. And that is precisely the trap, because they are not inconsequential. They are the building blocks of your direction. And your direction, held consistently enough for long enough, is your destination. Here is what I want you to carry from today. You do not need to change everything. You do not need to overhaul your life in a burst of dramatic action that will exhaust you within a week. You need to change the direction. Just 2 degrees, as we said at the beginning. But those 2 degrees have to be real. They have to be chosen, not just felt. And they have to be held, through the ordinary days and the difficult ones, through the days when the motivation is present and the days when only the decision remains. Let me close with the image we began with. The ship. The 2-degree adjustment. The vast difference in destination that a small, consistent change in heading produces across sufficient time and distance. You are the ship. You have always been the ship. And you have always had, within you, the capacity to adjust the heading. What these 7 rules give you is not new capability. You already possess that. What they give you is a compass. A clear, honest, practical set of principles that, when you live by them seriously and consistently, ensure that every day you are moving in the direction you have chosen rather than the direction of least resistance. Rule 1. Take full ownership of where you are. No more explanations that relinquish your power. The situation is yours to change. Rule 2. Define what you actually want, on your own terms. Not your family's script. Not your culture's definition. Yours. Rule 3. Protect your time with the seriousness of someone who understands that hours are the actual currency of a life. Spend them on what matters. Rule 4. Invest in who you are becoming. Read, learn, examine, grow. The person you are becoming is the most important project you will ever manage. Rule 5. Build relationships that pull you forward. Choose your closest environment with the same intentionality you would bring to any other important decision. Rule 6. Embrace discomfort as the price of every meaningful thing. Stop retreating from the edge of growth. That edge is where your best life is being built. Rule 7. Play the long game with absolute consistency. Hold the heading on the ordinary days. Hold it on the difficult ones. Trust what compounds. These 7 rules, taken seriously and lived consistently, do not promise an easy path. Nothing honest ever promises that. What they promise is a directed one. A path that is yours, chosen deliberately, navigated with principle, and held with the kind of quiet, grounded confidence that comes only from knowing that you are finally moving in the direction you decided on rather than the direction you accidentally drifted into. We began this journey with the image of a ship making a 2-degree turn, but we must now address the internal mechanics of what makes that turn permanent. Most people fail to change their direction not because they lack the desire, but because they treat their decisions as proposals rather than edicts. A true decision, from the Latin decidere, meaning to cut off, is a radical act of elimination. To change your heading by even 2 degrees, you must be willing to cut off the behaviors, the excuses, and the social validations that were tethering you to your old destination. At age 50 or 60, you no longer have the luxury of trying on a new direction for a few weeks to see if it feels comfortable. Comfort is exactly what created the drift in the first place. Decisional radicalism means that when you apply Rule 1 and take full ownership, you stop negotiating with your past self. You must become a benevolent dictator over your own routines, recognizing that the you who drifted is not the same you who will navigate the ship to a new continent. This requires a level of intensity that many find uncomfortable, but remember Rule 6. Discomfort is the price of admission for every meaningful thing. You are not just changing a habit. You are performing surgery on your destiny, removing the malignant asterisks that have allowed you to settle for less than you were capable of becoming. As you adjust your heading, you will quickly realize that changing direction requires a fuel that is often in short supply at midlife: emotional energy. If Rule 3 tells you to protect your time, then this principle tells you to protect your peace. Most people in their 50s are leaking emotional capital through the holes of unresolved resentments, old arguments with people who aren't even in the room, and the fog of past regrets. You cannot hold a steady 2-degree shift if your hands are shaking from the weight of things you should have dropped a decade ago. Investing in who you are becoming, Rule 4, requires you to audit your internal narrative with the same cold precision you would use on a financial spreadsheet. Are you spending your limited focus on managing the frustrations of your current drift, or are you investing it in the navigation of your new destination? Emotional stewardship means choosing to be productively misunderstood by those who prefer the old, drifting version of you rather than staying small to keep them comfortable. It means recognizing that your energy is a finite, non-refundable resource, and if you waste it on bitterness, you won't have enough left for the consistency Rule 7 demands. Clean up your internal environment, close the open tabs of your past, and focus every ounce of your spirit on the new horizon you have defined on your own terms. There is a dangerous voice that often emerges between ages 45 and 65, A voice that calls itself realism, but is actually resignation in a clever disguise. It tells you that at your age, the big moves are over, and that Rule 4, investing in yourself, is a young person's game. It suggests that you have already seen enough of the world to know how your story ends, so why bother with a 2-degree shift now? This settled wisdom is a mirage. It is the drift trying to protect itself from the disruption of your growth. Genuine wisdom, as Marcus showed Paul, is the recognition that the most important work of your life is the person you are becoming right now, regardless of the years behind you. If you are 55, you may have 30 years of high-functioning life ahead of you. That is more time than it takes to build an entire career or raise a family from scratch. Do not let the conventional script for your age convince you to stop learning, or stop risking. Rule 6 reminds us that growth signals often feel like anxiety. Don't mistake the discomfort of a new direction for the tiredness of old age. The most vibrant people in their 60s are not those who are finished, but those who are still navigating, still adjusting their heading, and still playing the long game with absolute consistency. When you begin to live by Rule 5, building relationships that pull you forward, you will encounter a phenomenon I call social gravity. Your current social circle was largely formed while you were on your old heading. They are accustomed to the drifting version of you because that version was predictable and safe. As you make your 2-degree turn, you will notice a subtle, and sometimes overt, resistance from those around you. It isn't that they don't love you, it's that your change in direction forces them to examine their own drift, and most people find that examination intolerable. They may use humor to minimize your new disciplines, or use shared history to guilt you back into old patterns of time wasting. This is where Rule 5 becomes a test of your character. You must be intentional about who gets your best hours. You do not need to cut people out with cruelty, but you must realize that proximity to mediocrity will eventually erode the sharpest of compasses. Seek out the accelerators, those people who don't just tolerate your new direction but demand it from you. If you are the most disciplined person in your circle is too small. Find a group where your heroic 2-degree shift is considered the baseline of normal behavior. Rule 7, playing the long game, is most difficult in what I call the geography of the unglamorous middle. This is the space where the initial excitement of your new direction has worn off, but the entirely different continent is not yet visible on the horizon. In this middle section, the 2-degree shift feels like a lot of work for no visible return. The water still looks identical, the sky still looks the same, and the voice of drift will whisper that you are working hard for a destination that doesn't exist. This is where ordinary people abandon the rules, but where extraordinary lives are quietly forged. Consistency in the middle is not about feeling progress, it is about trusting the mathematics of compounding. You must learn to fall in love with the unglamorous repetition of small daily choices, the ordinary days that determine the floor of your life. When you are in the middle of a difficult decade, like Paul was after age 53, you don't look for the destination every morning. You look at the compass, you check the heading, and you hold it for another 24 hours. The middle is not a delay, it is the actual journey. If you can master the middle, the destination will take care of itself. To truly change direction, you must perform a radical rejection of the most dangerous phrase in the English language, good enough. Good enough is the anesthetic of the drift. It allows you to tolerate a life that is adjacent to the one you wanted without ever feeling the sharp pain necessary to spark a change. Paul had a life that was good enough in the functional sense, but it left him with a sense of unfinished business that haunted his early 50s. Rule 2, defining what you actually want, is the antidote to the good enough trap. It requires the courage to say, I am grateful for what I have, but I am not satisfied with who I am. This isn't about greed. It's about stewardship of your one and only life. If you settle for good enough relationships, good enough health, or good enough character, you are essentially deciding that the ship should just stop in the middle of the ocean because the weather is currently fine. But ships are not built for the middle of the ocean. They are built for destinations. Reject the conventional script that says you should just manage the life you have, and instead commit to the direction that feels like yours. A life of genuine direction is far more demanding than a life of good enough, but it is also the only life that will leave you genuinely contented at the end of the voyage. We often think that our 2-degree turn is a private matter, but as you reach your 50s and 60s, you must realize that your heading creates a wake that others are following. Your children, your grandchildren, and the younger people in your professional orbit are watching how you handle your midlife years. If they see you surrender to drift, If they see you retreat into comfort and settled wisdom, they will conclude that growth has an expiration date. But if they see you apply Rule 6, embracing discomfort to learn a new skill or repair a damaged relationship, you are giving them a masterclass in human potential. Your direction is a silent education for everyone in your wake. Taking full ownership, Rule 1, isn't just about your results. It's about modeling what a powerful, self-directed human being looks like. When you define what you want on your own terms, Rule 2, you give others the permission to stop living by borrowed expectations as well. Your commitment to the long game, Rule 7, shows them that extraordinary lives are built in the ordinary days, not in bursts of luck. Do not change direction just for yourself. Change it because the world needs more examples of people who refuse to drift. Your heading is your legacy. Make sure it's one that leads somewhere worth following. We conclude where we began, with a decision. You now hold the 7 rules, the compass that can take you from drift to navigation. But a compass is only a piece of metal and glass until it is held by someone who is willing to trust the needle and hold the course. Being the master of the compass means you stop waiting for the vast ocean to become easier and instead focus on becoming a better navigator. It means you accept that Rule 7 is the hardest because it requires you to be your best self when you feel you're least motivated. It means you realize that the window isn't closing, it's just getting narrower, which means every degree of accuracy matters more now than it ever did before. Look at the rules one last time: ownership, clarity, time protection, self-investment, intentional relationships, embracing discomfort, long game consistency. These are not 7 separate tasks. They are the 7 pillars of a life that actually belongs to you. Exactly as things are, with your current constraints and your current resources, you have the capacity to adjust the heading. The 2-degree turn is yours to make, the continent is yours to reach, and the journey is yours to build. Adjust the heading, hold the direction, and start sailing. To hold a new heading with absolute certainty, you must perform what I call a radical audit of your own mind. As we age, we often realize that many of the truths we have lived by for decades were never actually ours. They were borrowed convictions. They were the hand-me-down beliefs of parents who feared for our safety, the social norms of a decade that has long since passed, or the loud opinions of peers who were drifting just as much as we were. Rule 2, defining what you want on your own terms, cannot be fully realized until you identify and discard these mental stowaways. Think about the rules you follow in your head. The voice that says you're too old for a career shift, or the belief that you must suffer through a toxic relationship to prove your loyalty. Ask yourself, is this my conviction, or is it echoes of someone else's fear? When you adjust your heading by 2 degrees, you are not just changing your destination. You are claiming your intellectual and emotional sovereignty. This audit is uncomfortable because it feels like you are betraying your history, but remember Rule 6. Growth requires the discomfort of shedding the skin that no longer fits. You cannot steer a ship toward a new continent if your navigation system is still programmed with your grandfather's maps. Clear the deck of every borrowed belief that anchors you to the drift, and replace them with principles you have tested, verified, and chosen for yourself. In any long voyage, there is a moment where the initial enthusiasm of the turn evaporates and the finish line is nowhere in sight. In the world of human change, this is where the second wind must be summoned. Rule 7, playing the long game, is not about a single burst of energy, it is about the mastery of your own internal engine. When you are in your 50s or 60s, you know that willpower is a limited resource that fades by sunset. Therefore, your second wind is not a feeling of motivation, it is the structural integrity of your habits. It is the moment when you stop asking yourself how you feel and start asking what the heading requires. Most people quit when they hit the boring middle, the place where the 2-degree shift feels like a heavy chore with no visible reward. But the navigator knows that the most profound change is happening under the surface, in the invisible progress of the ship's momentum. The second wind comes to those who stop looking for external signs of success and start finding deep satisfaction in the sheer act of holding the course. If you can survive the middle of the ocean, the unglamorous, repetitive middle, the arrival at your new destination becomes not just a hope, but a mathematical certainty. We must now address the most practical application of Rule 3, the creation of the non-negotiable day. Protecting your time like your life depends on it means that certain hours must become sacred ground where the drift is not allowed to enter. At your stage of life, the world assumes you are always available for their fires, their crises, and their demands on your attention. But to hold your 2-degree turn, you must draw a hard line in the sand. A non-negotiable day is not about being rigid or cold. It is about the stewardship of your remaining years. It means that your hour of self-investment, Rule 4, is as vital as a doctor's appointment. It means your intentional time with loved ones, Rule 5, cannot be interrupted by a casual phone call or a quick email. When you treat your time as sacred, the world eventually learns to respect it, but only after you have respected it yourself. Stop apologizing for having a direction. Stop asking for permission to be focused. The ship does not ask the waves for permission to stay on course. It simply holds its heading. Your daily schedule is the literal geography of your destiny. If you don't build a fortress around it, the drift will reclaim it within 48 hours. Finally, let us speak of the ultimate meaning of your 2-degree shift, the legacy of a life lived with intention. There is no greater gift you can give to your children, your grandchildren, or your community than the image of a person who refused to let their final decades be defined by drift. When you apply Rule 1 and take full ownership, you are teaching everyone in your wake that power is not something given by circumstances, but something claimed by the Spirit. When you embrace discomfort, Rule 6, to become something more at 60 than you were at 50, you are shattering the myth of decline. Your life becomes a living proof that the compass is more powerful than the current. This is not about being a success in the way the world defines it. It is about being a navigator of your own soul. At the end of the voyage, the question will not be, did you have a smooth journey? The question will be, did you steer the ship? Did you choose the destination? Did you hold the heading when the fog was thick? Did you protect the hours? Did you love the people? If you can answer yes to those questions, you have not just lived a life, you have mastered the art of being human. The 2-degree turn you make today is the starting point for a story that will be told for generations. So, take the wheel, check the compass, adjust the heading, and sail with everything you have.